Hey, how's everybody doing today? Hello. How are ya? Let's do this. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get right into it. Chapter 42. Reynold. What do you mean you're in love? You can't possibly. This is ridiculous. Reynold was incensed. His entire life, he'd been subjected to the restraints and prejudices of Lunari society. Even at the depths of his addiction, he'd been expected to observe the rules of obeisance and adherence to tradition. This was madness. Her sister had clearly lost her marbles. She stood at the door resolute, eyes cold, arms crossed. Her lips were curled in an almost sneer. Reynold stammered, I mean, he's not even Lunari. Ayanna rushed past the small table and punched Reynold right in the face. He stumbled backwards, holding her back with one hand and catching the bedpost with the other. He strained to stay upright as she swung her arms and kicked at him. They were 5 years old and 10 all over again. He cried out, voice cracking, Sister, stop! Ayanna growled in his ear, still scrambling to land a punch. He's more man than you could ever be, you fucking child! Martok broke through the door, his free hand reaching for his knife. Reynold waved him off, hurling Ayanna down to her knees beside the bed. Enough! He shouted. Martok stood at attention as Ayanna rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her robes. Ayanna turned to stare at him, breathing heavily, teeth bared with fury. Reynold sighed. Thank you, Lieutenant. You may go. Martok dipped his head and left, nodding to the priestess as he shut the door. Your mercy. Ayanna leaned against the table and glared. Eons passed as they both struggled to find words. Finally, mercifully, Ayanna broke the silence. You will not oppose this pairing. I have made my choice. Father is dead, and mother is irrelevant. You will grant your blessing, and I will hear nothing more on the subject. She marched toward the door, breathing deeply and straightening her short curls back into place beneath her circlet. Reynold spoke firmly and with authority. I will not oppose it, but know that you are making a terrible decision. She looked back, eyes of stone, face still as an icy pond. She whispered, Duly noted, brother. The doorframe shook as the door crashed shut. Reynold flinched, then fell onto the bed with a thump. Oh, Father, what would you say to us now? As always, his father was silent. Not for the first time, Reynold wondered if there was anything beyond the veil. He prayed there was, but so far he'd found no evidence to prove it. He'd survived the attack, but would he survive the consequences of Ayanna's stupidity? He shuddered at the image of their mother upon learning the news. The thought brought a chill to his bones. He couldn't think of a more terrifying sight, and he'd just fought an army of skeletal swordsmen and a dragon. Gods, what a nightmare. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Reynold. is just so aggrieved. He does not know what to make of this. He's like, but we're rich and powerful. We got to do what mommy says. Oh, man. That's the me I never want to be. You know what I'm saying? Reynold is like, ugh. He's who I've been at times. Not great. Although he was willing to climb up a flying chariot with a sword and stuff, so he's like, he's got that on it. He's got that on his side on the pro column. Anywho, chapter 43, Portillion. Come on, Pong Jung has something he wants us to see. Portillion looked as giddy as a schoolboy. Therese roused herself and gathered her staff and satchel. Ayana and Grundle were in the backyard, presumably caressing one another. The image delighted Portillion. He'd seen such interracial dalliances in movies and television, but never in person. The thought of being in close proximity to such a strange situation excited him. Not as much as Therese, to be sure, but it wasn't far off. Something about the breaking of taboos made his blood run hot. He reached out to Therese and kissed her cheek. She pulled away, adopting a mock expression of annoyance. What was that for? They kissed. Gods, what a force she was. He smiled and skipped to the back door, knocking loudly. He leaned over to the open window and shouted out, Grundle, the wizard has something to show us. Come on, we ought not keep him. Therese sighed and walked to the door. She opened it for Portillion. He kissed her on the cheek and hopped out into the street, cheeks flushed in anticipation. Portillion is just so jazzed. But, you know, they call him the boy wizard for a reason. He's kind of boyish. He's at that age, you know? That age where everything seems so meaningful. All right, what's next? Chapter 44, Therese. She was so bored. The crank wizard had led them on a winding path away from the great tree onto a gently sloping ramp into the murk of the outer region. As best she could figure, they'd gone in a more or less southwesterly direction, assuming the cardinal directions were even relevant in a place like this. Martok and Captain Stargazer were at the tail end of the group, weapons in hand. They were at full alert, ready to leap into action at the slightest provocation. She envied them their training. If she had been a soldier, perhaps she might have learned how to stay engaged despite hours of nothing happening. Portillion would not stop grinning. He was flipping through a book of old maps he had fished out of the library stacks and was animatedly pointing out landmarks. To her, they all seemed like barely visible lanterns hanging at odd intervals around the path. She stifled a yawn. Therese looked up at Ayana and asked, Beloved mother, have you received any insight regarding this place? Ayana looked back at her and nodded. Some. I have the feeling that the goddess is more present the further away we travel from the great tree. It's possible that the gods have allowed the tree to exist independently of their influence. To the question of why, I cannot say. There was little doubt that her powers were returning. Therese said a quick prayer and watched as the men in the party calmed their muscles and settled into a quieter mode. Their pace evened out. The only one unaffected seemed to be Pong Jung. This wizard was powerful indeed. Aeona stopped and pointed at a circle of strange lights and standing stones just to the left of the path. Pong Jung clapped his hands and nodded. Yes, yes, this way, friends. The group followed, Portillion hustling to join the older wizard. Therese slowed just enough to drift within speaking distance of the two soldiers. Martok, it appears we have a visitor. Reynold was smiling. Therese had caught him looking at her from time to time and had not dissuaded him. Clearly, she was a beautiful woman, and when she sashayed just so, she imagined the effect it might have on him. Uh, when she sashayed just so, she imagined the effect it might have upon him. Martok, on the other hand, was as hard as a stone. Married, father of four, he certainly would not be moved by a loosely weaving woman's enticements. Certainly not by a woman so highly placed and certainly not by a woman so highly placed and involved in the work of the church. She felt a bit annoyed that she could not pierce his stony exterior. Perhaps with time she might corrupt him a bit, possibly even to the point of sullying his moral character completely. Sadly, she was saddled with the boy magician. For the moment. Forgive me, my lord, but is it wise to stray so far from the troops? I know this man is harmless at the moment, but what if he changes his spots? I've never trusted magic users all that much. The subtext couldn't be clearer. She was not as loyal to the boy as she'd led them all to believe. Let that sink in. Maybe I can devour this poor knight as well as Portillion. Martok spoke up. Your mercy, I am no lord, and I'm not worried. Mother Aeona has studied his character and found him to be a credible ally. Reynolds stopped. He put up his shield hand, and Martok stopped as well, sliding into a defensive posture. The sounds of distant spheres had silenced entirely. Something was happening, and the captain was wary of any unexpected changes. Therese yawned. The spirit knew exactly what was happening, and knew it was nothing special. Therese whispered, with an almost childlike lilt to her voice. It's only the sentinel. No reason for alarm. The two men stared at her, eyes contorted in surprise or confusion. She remembered herself and inwardly cursed her carelessness. She gulped and answered, Portillion told me about it. Don't worry, it's only a guide. Don't worry, it's only a guide, she said malevolently. Therese is just so bad all of a sudden. What happened? Oh, right, a demon got in her. Chapter 45. Martok. Martok was sick and tired of this endless journey. His joints ached from yesterday's battle. His stomach was shouting for some real food, something that wasn't fungus-based or hard ration, and his men were growing increasingly unprofessional. And now this. The young priestess was clearly attempting to draw out he and the captain. To what end, he couldn't be sure, but it was most definitely not good. He couldn't comprehend why such an obvious tart would be accepted into the ranks of the church. He had a mind to show her some manners, but that way lay madness. When anger rises, logic quickly drowns. Anger was not far from obsession, and erotic impulses weren't far from that. He hadn't stayed faithful to his wife by pondering the harlotry of young women, and he had no intention of starting now. The sentinel turned out to be a sort of stone-shaped automaton, hardly a threat as it was barely able to move and appeared to be completely unarmed. Portillion and the strange wizard spoke to it in the common tongue, but it was no more interesting to Martok than anything else in this ridiculous cavern. This is Reynolds. Reynolds said, Captain Stargazer said, Lieutenant, you'll stay here with Pong Jung and the robot. I'll go with Teres and Portillion, and my sister will go with Verkelet. We'll cover the area and report back in, he checked his gauntlet, 15 minutes. Martok nodded. The two groups split off in either direction, moving slowly until their shadows drifted into the ether. Martok kept his eyes on the wizard, his sword resting hilt up against his chest. His sword resting against his chest. The pommel, see, pommel up, tip down. How do you describe this motion? Leaning on his sword? I don't know. The wizard smiled wanly. The sentinel did nothing at all. Yeah. His sword resting hilt up against his chest. Sounds weird, right? And pommel up is no better. That sounds like a kind of soup. I got some bacon pommel up today at the farmer's market. You know, pommel up. That popular thing. Here we go. Chapter 46. Grundle. The Sentinel was fascinating. If he'd had his choice, he would have studied it, perhaps even taken it apart piece by piece, looking for the source of its apparent sentience. He couldn't believe how uninterested the others were in its inner workings. A being of stone, animated by magic? What could possibly be more interesting than that? Portillion explained the purpose of their mission. According to this map, the ancients who built these pathways stored powerful artifacts in places like this. He waved his wand to circumscribe the area. They were designed to provide travelers with a place to rest, as well as store artifacts that would assist them in their journey. He tapped the sentinel on the shoulder, who responded by turning his expressionless face to greet them. This being was placed here to answer questions and to suggest the proper course for each journey. And out there, he waved again to the smaller paths stretching out around them, lay the artifacts themselves. Aeona nodded. Yes, but what are they? Portillion cleared his throat. I can't be certain, As best I can figure, there should be something that heals, as well as something that can guide us to various different gates. It may even have a coordinate system, so we can plot where each gate opens out. Grundle whistled quietly as the being shifted its. Wait. Grundle whistled quietly as the being shifted its face to watch each person as they spoke. What a marvel! Reynold coughed. Everyone turned to look at him, including the sentinel. There are multiple paths. Let's split up. Grundle groaned inwardly. The area didn't feel dangerous, but one could never be certain. After meeting Pong Jung, the world of the in-between had become considerably more anxiety-inducing. He spoke up. Her Mercy and I will take this path. Reynold rolled his eyes. Don't you think we should ask the Sentinel first? Martok chuckled briefly before restoring his composure. Grundle's eyes narrowed. He scratched his temple, eyeing the stone being very carefully. Suddenly, the creature snapped to its full height, opened its strange, creaky stone jaws, and barked out in a strange, high-pitched tone. Ask me what? Ask me what? Pretty weird, huh? Ask me what? All right, y'all. Think on that. Next time, it will be what chapter? Where are we? Chapter 47. Ayana. So Ayana and Grundle are going left. The rest are going right. Bye.